Hello everyone. This topic of CISSP want us to understand the concept of asset retention. Each organization must handle and retain assets and records as per the applicable laws, directives, policies, regulations and standards, and also as per the operational requirement of that particular organization. Like in our home, we receive the electricity bill and mobile bill and we keep them till the time we pay them. Once we pay these bills, we will dispose them off. And suppose I purchase a concert ticket, so I will retain that particular ticket till the time I visit that particular event. And if there are some lucky draw in that particular event, then I will further retain that particular ticket for the next 2 weeks till the time when that particular lucky draw result will be declared. So the retention period of the asset varies, and as a security professional, we must understand how to decide the asset retention time frame. So we can say if we know the proper retention time duration for any asset, we will focus on the security of the same for that particular time duration. Then we will dispose that particular asset and we will use the same resources to protect other assets. So data or asset retention helps to preserve the intellectual property in e-discovery or forensic examination. Also, it helps us in fulfilling the obligation of regulatory and compliance expectations. And in the last, a better asset retention helps us to provide better security to the assets. If we do not have any data retention process in our organization, then we will experience more incidents related to record tampering, data loss, or inappropriate access. So we must know which types of the information should be maintained and for how long. All major regulations such as HIPAA, PCI DSS, and GDPR suggest some kind of information retention. So in our organization, we must establish asset retention guidelines, which cover the type of the asset like critical, production, etc. and also the sensitivity of the data like confidential, public, etc. We must also understand that asset and data retention is essential to protect and preserve records as evidence of actions. So the step to develop an asset retention policy are: first, we need to decide what are the electronic and physical documents in our organization are, and then we need to assign ownership to those. This whole step need to be done by some designated person with proper authority or by a committee. This person or committee should review all the relevant rules and regulation for asset and data retention to make sure the policy align with them. Then we need to select a template for the policy and create the same. Once the policy is ready, we need to publish the policy and we need to train the employees to use that particular policy. On a periodic basis, we need to review the document retention policy and update it as needed. So a good information retention policy should document the purpose of the policy. It should also identify who is affected by the policy. It should also identify the types of data and electronic system covered by the policy. It should also define key terms, especially legal and technical terms. It should also describe the requirement in detail from the legal, business and personal perspectives. It should also outline the procedure for ensuring data is properly retained. It should also outline the procedure for ensuring data is properly destroyed. It should also clearly document the litigation expectation, process, and how to respond to the discovery request. So a good information retention policy should also list all the responsibilities of those involved in data retention activity. That particular policy should also build a table showing the information type and its corresponding retention period. So in short, we can say that the policy should make it clear that during all phases of the data management lifecycle, including destruction, proper secure handling procedure are required. So for us, means for a security professional, the most important role in asset retention is to create and maintain a policy that is informed by and adhere to all the regulations, which also meet the business objective and should be understood and followed in the organization. For this, we need to conduct and document training and testing of the policy. This will also help us to measure the program performance related to the policy. And ultimately, it is the user who is going to handle the data and use the asset or data. So the user have to be made aware of their responsibilities in maintaining the safeguards during the life cycle of the assets. Audits should also be conducted to assure the organization that the policy and procedures are being followed. One more important point which we need to take care is that we should not dispose of the asset too soon or improperly when the data retention period is exceeded. Now let's discuss more on the retention of records. When data is categorized as a collection of related data items, documenting a business transaction or satisfying a business need, we call it as a record. So we must understand the need of the organization due to the regulatory and business requirement to maintain a record have to be accessed and evaluated against the right of the individuals. We must also understand that excessive retention increases risk of data exposure beyond necessary regulatory obligations. That's why we need to retain the record as per the defined time duration in the policy or as per the regulatory requirement is. The organization should have a periodic review of retained records to reduce the volume of both hard and soft copy of the records in the organization. We must also use active archiving system for compliance with record retention requirement. Archival storage will help us to follow the guidance through a hierarchical storage approach for record management. Some records have to be maintained but are infrequently accessed. So this archival system helps us to store and maintain the information for long term and slower retrieval system rather than on expensive and high speed devices, like doing archival on the tape drive instead of storing the data on the SSD hard drive. Determining appropriate record retention, there are also regulatory requirements that cause an organization to establish and maintain record retention policies that exceed the internal useful life of the record. An example of this scenario is HIPAA, which required the healthcare organization to maintain the documentation related to HIPAA compliance, such as log record, for at least 6 years. But the record retention requirement in other laws and regulation is less than 6 years. So the record retention requirement should be complemented with de-identification and obfuscation processes. We can meet the regulatory compliance by regularly purging and by not retaining the personal data any longer than is necessary. So it is a challenge to locate and protect all of the information in the numerous record locations in the organization. So the security professional must be able to design and implement a record management program to provide ways to identify, maintain and dispose of company record in a safe, timely and cost-effective manner. We can use the HSM, hierarchical storage management system, for this record storage. So HSM automatically moves data between high cost and low cost storage media. So high cost storage media like SSD, which cost more than the slower storage options such as magnetic drives, optical disk and magnetic tape drives. So the use of high speed storage is appropriate for frequent retrieval of the record, and it also provides low latency. So bulk of the data in any enterprise we do not require for rapid retrieval, so we will move them to the slower storage devices. So HSM may also be used to support the archival process. So in record retention we have some best practices. So each organization must handle and retain records in accordance with the applicable laws, directive, policies, regulation, standard and operational requirements. So there are some best practices for record retention which a security professional must know. First, they need to maintain records according to the organization record retention schedule. Second, they need to conduct regular evaluation of the system. Also, we can conduct a review of the actual record retention schedule every other year to make sure the schedule is relevant to business requirement and regulatory requirements. Then we need to label electronic maintained records. Also, we need to create backup electronic file copies. Then we need to retain paper copies of the records that cannot be accurately or completely transferred to the electronic record keeping system. Also, do not keep the records longer than is necessary. Then make sure records have valid date of origin. The movement and use of records can change electronic file dates, but not the date that determine the retention period. A reasonable attempt should be made to remove the unnecessary electronic records as per the retention schedule in all the identified electronic repository. Then we need to maintain information handling controls over the full life cycle of the information. Also, we need to ensure that the records remain persistent, accessible for the length of the time they are retained according to the frequency with which they are retrieved. Then we need to deduplicate records to avoid unnecessary storage of multiple copies that increase risk and storage cost. Also, we must use automated compression utilities and storage. As a security professional, we must remember to classify and retain emails that are official records. Also, we need to ensure that records remain accessible for the required retention period by periodically converting and migrating records from media sources, because digital media can degrade or become obsolete over time. Then we need to securely delete data in accordance with the retention period and information security and retention policy. So we can say that appropriate retention enables organization to be able to verify the authenticity of the records they keep. As the surge in criticality, value, and volume of the digital information continues to grow, record retention is important to prevent the organization from being overwhelmed and records becoming unavailable and unprotected. So summing this all, we can say that there is no universally applicable record management plan, but we can examine and know specific requirement of the organization and consider the best approaches to best serve the organization for record retention. With this, I just want to say thanks and keep watching for more such videos.